Welcome to the Korea Pro Podcast, your weekly guide to understanding the most pressing and complicated developments shaping South Korea. We're your hosts, Jungmin Kim,
John Lei,
and Junha Park of Korea Pro.
Go beyond headlines as we explain not just what happened, but also what really matters and why it matters.
If you monitor South Korea for work or just trying to keep up, you're in the right place.
This is the Korea Pro Podcast.
Hello, listeners, and welcome back to another episode of the Korea Pro Podcast. It is now Thursday, June 4th. It's a little bit after 2:30 p.m., and we are going to be talking about the elections today. So, Junha, could you walk us through what were the numbers, who won, who lost?
Right, so the scale of the DP's regional gains was quite difficult to dispute. The party won quite a commanding lead over the PPP in yesterday's vote, winning 12 out of the 16 mayoral or gubernatorial races that were on par, including Gyeonggi, where former Justice Minister Choo Mi-ae won with more than 55% of the vote, and also Jeju, where Lee Sung-kwon captured over 63%. They also prevailed in Cheongbuk, Incheon, Daejeon, and Ulsan, also Sejong, maintaining sort of an overwhelming dominance within their traditional strongholds. Of course, this marked this dramatic reversal from the 2022 local elections when the party only won 5 of the 17 metropolitan and provincial or gubernatorial district or races that were on in the early months of former President Yoon Suk-yeol's administration. So one hiccup came where the message did not resonate for the DP's campaign in Seoul when the conservative incumbent mayor and the PPP candidate Oh Se-hoon, he survived what many observers before the race had expected for him to lose out on his 5th consecutive term as mayor. So right now, it does look that Oh has received I think he was initially trailing by 30,000 or 300,000 votes, but now he
was trailing throughout the night, really.
Right. So now he's secured close to 49% with 48.94% of the vote to Chung Won-ho's 48.34%, winning by approximately 30,000 votes, give or take. So the result for the mayoral and gubernatorial races, they preserved this sort of conservative control of the capital and did not give the DP a sweeping victory, as many would suggest. In the by-elections, of course, this was where the picture got a little complicated. So the DP won 9 out of 14 constituencies across the country, compared to 4 for the PPP and 1 independent victory in Han Dong-hoon. So several of these high-profile DP figures, they successfully returned to the National Assembly. The former lawmaker and former DP leader Song Yeong-gil in Incheon Yeonsugap, the former Blue House spokesperson Kim Nam-jun from Gaeang. But of course, the broader picture was less favorable than these raw numbers suggest, since the DP, since 13, I believe, of the 14 contested seats were held originally by DP lawmakers or members of that broader progressive ruling bloc. By winning only 9 of these contests, this means that the DP had a net average that was below the count, and now that they have, I believe, 161 seats in the National Assembly compared to their former count. And the PPP now has 110, with 1 independent in Han Dong-hoon winning in Busan.
The Gyeonggi Pyeongtaek area was very interesting among the by-election results. So it was a 3-way competition compared to other regions that were mostly just DP and PPP, because Pyeongtaek was where Cho-guk was running. And
former Justice Minister,
right,
under President Moon Jae-in.
And the leader of the Rebuilding
Korea Party.
Rebuilding Korea Party, RKP.
And the leader of the Rebuilding Korea Party. And it's interesting because until last minute, I believe there were still noises about whether or not DP and Cho-guk's party should merge for a better win for the progressives. But then guess what happened? In Pyeongtaek, PPP Yoo Hee-dong won the seat for the parliamentary by-election. So it will now come with follow-up controversies and discussions on whether or not this was a good strategy and going forward. What do they do with the Rebuilding Korea Party, with the progressive voter sort of split? Other areas of interest, Han Dong-hoon, he was running against, it was Busan, so that was very interesting choice, I would say. But he was running against Ha Jung-woo, the AI secretary of the Blue House under Lee Jae Myung administration. He's sort of like a new superstar, I guess, under this administration. He used to be a corporate man before. But at the end, Han Dong-hoon at first was losing, but then towards the end of the night, he ultimately got the seat. So not many of international observers know, but Han Dong-hoon actually has never been a lawmaker before. He was a leader of the party, the Conservative Party, for a long time, especially during the tumultuous period. And his main enemy is probably not DP, but PPP at this point. But yeah, he finally went into the National Assembly like Lee Jun-suk did in the past. Daegu was interesting. I was born in Daegu. I didn't grow up there, but Daegu was also always interesting to me because I've never seen, at the end of the day, Daegu went to, for the both by-election parliamentary and the mayoral, it both went to PPP. But it was still very interesting because it was never even a contested area in the past. So at least it was fascinating to see how the Daegu region was split into regions where there are younger Daegu citizens usually live in, like Namgu, and other areas where older generations live. But at the end of the day, it was mostly leaning conservative. And Chu Kyung-ho, another controversial person after martial law of the People Power Party, he became the leader of Daegu. Other interesting stuff just about the result. There were more interesting stuff unrelated to the result, actually, that we will go into later on.
Oh, yeah.
That kept us up very late. We did not expect that to happen. But when it comes to the mayoral, actually, the Seoul one, until very last minute, it was a very neck and neck. And at the end of the day, was it like 0.4% gap?
Yeah.
0.5%? It was very slight gap.
It was really thin.
Yeah. And just considering how most of the Seoul citizens voted quite progressively during the past two elections, this is interesting. But having said that, the areas that lean conservative, south of the river, they are usually conservative.
강남, 서초, 송파.
Yeah, Gangnam, Seocho, Songpa is traditionally the most conservative ones, but this time around, overall, all the region aside from Kuro and Gwanak, which is where Seoul National University is, and it's quite progressive. Aside from that, everybody south of the river, all the districts were red. This is interesting, and if we look at the actual exit polls and the other details, I was reading into it a little bit. Overall, there is a gap between men and women voting, not in Seoul, but overall. Men in 20s and 30s and who are 19 who started voting, most of them voted conservative, of course. And women were like even more leaning towards the left. Men were a bit more split, I think. But interestingly, in Seoul, women in their 30s leaned conservative. And this is an interesting factor because they did not used to be like that before. And it's something to keep an eye on. Speaking of which, there were some factors that were, I think voters were, taking into account when they were trying to decide between Oh Se-hoon and Chung Won-ho. First of all, Oh Se-hoon, I think, like his supporters, it largely comes from either people who are policy-wise leaning conservative, like real estate. Hence the south of the region, I believe. Also, Chung Won-ho has never done a mayoral level job before. So I think it might have been something to do related to his experience, I guess. But he also was very famous for his very productive and effective work as Hong Dong-gu leader. And that's what got him famous because Lee Jae Myung gave him a shout out personally on social media. So his fame was out of social media a little bit. And so, which meant a lot of the women were the initial supporters for Chung. But then last minute, there were some controversies related to restaurant that he went to and, female workers who worked there. Bad stories shared online about his behaviors in the past, alleged, but still. And so I think some of the factors they factored into last minute decisions of women in their 20s and 30s. People in their 50s, 40s, and 60s, they just, voted per usual. But anyways, it was a more of a much tighter race than we initially expected for
Hmm.
Seoul at the end.
I think
Thank God that I'm not a betting man because I was quite sure that Changwon was going to win.
Mm.
But yeah, as it turns out, the people south of the river, and they had other ideas.
right. So I think just looking at just Seoul in terms of the numbers, it does look like Sangdong district really went out in full force for Chung Won-ho. Chung Won-ho got most of his votes from Sangdong, all the DP affiliated regions in Seoul. But of course, as you mentioned, Jungmin, the Hangang Belt or the Han River Belt, where all of the real estate and the Chaegonchuk, the redevelopment districts are currently in full force to make sure that redevelopment actually happens at the given time vis-a-vis the Lee administration's real estate policies that are currently on force and also unpopular among homeowners as well. So I think that came into effect quite certainly this sort of is it within my interest to vote for Oh Se-hoon, or is it within my interest, especially in terms of real estate, to vote for Chang Wan-ho? And I think that really divided the votes at the end of the tally.
And like residents of Seoul are like many of them are those who are not born here. They
Mhm.
are here, especially the younger generation. They're here for their work. They're here for their job. They're in the midst of their mid-career sort of people. So I think like policy drives a little more of the
Mhm.
election result in the local election compared to other regions, it seems. And speaking of Seoul and the tight gap, let's move on to what happened overnight that stressed the hell out of us because there are many things a national election committee could do to make mess things up, but this is one of the stupidest things that you can do. There was a ballot shortage. There was a
And
ballot
there were lots
shortage.
of pissed off people.
And there
Understandably.
were there's some areas escalated actually, so hundreds of police and hundreds of crowd actually gathered in a standoff, especially in front of Chamsil poll station, where literally have to extend the voting hours up until 10 p.m. because they still needed to get the paper, and then people were waiting, and then that was way after the exit polls came out. So it was just really, really, regardless of how annoying Chang Dong-hyuk can be, the
Mhm.
PPP leader, trying to make use of this NEC has no excuses for this. This was a mess up. But
Absolutely.
yeah, just
Especially
to
given where the ballot shortage happened,
it was
th-
Songpa and Gangnam, so traditionally conservative.
which gave the PPP the perfect ammunition that they needed to claim that this was an attempt to rig the election, whether or not that was true, but that was a narrative that we saw at least for a few hours.
Yeah, and they did not really have much ammunition so far. That's why they have been talking about like who's the main enemy? Can you say North Korea? That sort of stuff in a local election debate. But then here was a perfect ammunition that nobody really expected. The ballot shortage apparently came from a miscalculation on the NEC's end, countering in the previous election turnout rate, plus considering how there were a lot of early voters, they only printed 50% of the total number of eligible voting population per district. And then it
Mhm.
led to problems also because they did not really move quickly when they started figuring out that there might be a ballot shortage. And because this was unprecedented, the response immediately afterward was also quite messy, with the NEC initially saying that, oh, the ballot shortage is due to too many people voting. Are you kidding me?
How could they have
That's your
went
job.
ahead with this campaign to try to get as many voters to show up and then not follow through with the hopes of their own expectations and not print the ballots? Did
Yeah.
did they run out of money? Did they run out of paper?
Apparently, there were issues in the past where when they printed too many ballots and too many ballots were left, unused, there were, rigged election conspiracy theories talking about that, like Hwang Kyo-an. But then, regardless, if it looks like from day one, or the first few hours that you expect the voting rate to be quite high, you need to sort of prepare for that, right? But then another thing was because this was unprecedented and these were conservative regions, initially, Oh Se-hoon was also losing in Seoul.
Hmm.
I think that might have been due to early voting. Early votes were counted first, which lean quite progressive. And then initially the PPP strategy until midnight and a little bit afterward was to go to NEC and demand that the vote counting should stop because it's a tainted. Yeah,
Stop the count,
yeah,
right?
stop the count. The election is tainted, hence it should be nullified, and we have to do a rematch. Now they're not talking about it for reason, I think, good reason.
Well, they won.
Yeah, they won. So I think they were initially trying to do an administrative lawsuit against the NEC and the result, but I don't think they're going to do it anymore, right?
Last
Doesn't
night
look
when this news
likely.
broke, I thought this was going to go on for a long time, that this was the topic that we'd be talking about for weeks. But yeah, as soon as the results came in and also won, the PPP is like, never mind.
Mm-hmm.
No harm, no foul.
And to Junha, my next question, what does this tell us, the result tell us about the stability of the second year of the Lee Jae Myung administration overall? In like specific regions, there are some like big budget policy agenda from the Lee administration where he has to work very closely with the governors and the mayors, like Busan, for instance, Busan, Ulsan, and there was a whole controversy about deprioritizing Jeolla province as well.
Yeah, so I'm gonna start off with Busan since it came up. So HMM, the move of the office or the headquarters to Busan, it's been something that's very much been contested within both inside HMM and both with the government. Of course, with the election of Chun Jae-soo, the former oceans minister who campaigned on the issue, as the new Busan mayor, it does look like that regional cooperation will be coming into full flow with the Lee administration. Seoul, on the other hand, that's a little more difficult. When you look at what Oh Se-hoon's been saying exactly minutes after his election was confirmed or confirmed by KBS or other pollsters, it does look like he'll give, or he'll at least try to give President Lee quite a hard time during cabinet meetings. Push forward the PPP's own agenda in towards the cabinet meeting where he will probably be contesting with finance minister, also the safety minister as well, and also even President Lee, where President Lee wants to push forward with his real estate policy. It does look like Oh Se-hoon has positioned himself as the sort of vanguard against Lee, but it does look like quite the contest that's coming up for the Lee administration. Of course, we don't need to overblow it since it is just 12 mayoral seats or gubernatorial seats out of the 16. It still is a very commanding victory for the DP to push forward with the Lee administration's agenda. But at the same time, in Seoul and Busan, these are two very contrasting outcomes.
John, what about Seoul especially? Are there any bigger, bigger budget agenda items on like related to presidential pledges where he needs the Seoul mayor's cooperation on going forward?
Well, when it comes to Seoul and the big budget items, it really comes on housing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Both Oh Se-hoon and Jung Won-ho were talking about housing. One was saying he'll build 310,000 housing units. The other one was saying 360,000. But whatever it was, what it actually came down to was the entire redevelopment plan, as Juna
Mm-hmm.
had mentioned several times by now. Uh, Also was really talking about redevelopment of this urban housing areas, whereas Jung Won-ho was also talking about, yeah, housing is important, but so is public infrastructure, public transportation. And when that was thrown into the mix, uh, a lot of NIMBY voters came out in full force, right? And so the housing policies really outweighed a lot of the public transportation demands that a lot of Seoul citizens have. And so these
Mm-hmm.
are the quite big areas where the Oh Se-hoon was able to win. Or, barring that, it's probably because Chung Won-ho did not have a policy about nuclear weapons. And so that probably tanked him a little bit. Uh, but all jokes aside, uh, what I was really surprised by in with last night's election, uh, it's nothing to do with the Democratic Party. That's easy. The Democratic Party's stuff is easy to analyze. It was a referendum on the Lee Jae Myung administration, blah blah blah. But when we look at the three big conservative candidates that won, we got three different flavors of conservatives. Chu Kyung-ho was the guy who was trying to prevent the PPP lawmakers from voting for impeachment right after martial law. He's now the mayor of Daegu.
Mm-hmm.
And Han Dong-hoon, who was the former justice minister and Yoon's closest confidant at one point, who was the one saying, "No, we should vote to impeach right away." He
Mm-hmm.
won. And then there's Oh Se-hoon who's saying, "Hey, impeachment was wrong, but let's not make this a big deal." He won. So three
Mm-hmm.
different brands of conservatives won.
And also,
So,
Oh Se-hoon has been doing like a very public conflict against Chang Dong-hyuk as well, PPP.
mhm. So, um, this whole Yoon again crowd, I thought that they were eventually going to be disabused after this election, but
Mm-hmm.
they might have some room to at least, maybe not shout, but at least whisper that they still have a way going forward because they had Chu and they were able to keep Daegu. But there's going to be a lot more infighting amongst the conservative camp right now because there seems to be this narrative that says, yes, you can win by being pro Yoon, and yes, you can win by distancing yourself from Yoon. So I think the civil war within the conservative camp is going to go on.
And I think that's actually a bad news for the conservatives if you look at it, it's sort of like a bird eye view of what conservatism means going forward in South Korea. I think, like, let's say hypothetically, let's say that all the regions went to DP and PPP had no way of, you know, winning ever again in the near future. Then they will be like sort of forced to really, redevelop themselves, like rebrand
Completely
themselves
change,
and
yeah.
completely change not only the name, but leadership and everything. But then now, because they won Seoul, which was one of the most important place, and also some of the, more like traditionally conservative area that still has a lot of stakes on, I'm not sure if they will really take the you know,
The hint.
constructive lesson from it, but I think they will sort of cherry pick what kind of strategy they can go for to survive in the current under the current leadership.
Mhm.
I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing for PvP, but my take is longer term. I'm not sure if this will be a good sign for PvP, anyways. Um, and let me talk about Jeonbuk just for a second because Jeonbuk was very interesting. Cholla province is DP's like most of the DP people's home, like literal hometown actually since 1995 when the local election started. Every single time for the local election for the governor, it was always DP or DP related figure who won. This time the DP side won, but the run up to that was very, very different from in the past. I think there was like a aggregated sentiment in Cholla province that DP takes Cholla to take it for granted, development and the budget, they don't get really much enough despite the votes that they give them. And at the end, it was about Chung Chung-rae's leadership. There was an aggregated concern and really annoyance about how Chung Chung-rae sort of punished the existing DP person because
Yeah.
of bribery controversy. But I'm not gonna say like, oh, punished someone for bribery. It happens all the time. That's not what I'm saying. But Charla people were still pissed that this guy was punished too harshly. And then what happened afterward, I think, mattered because the person who was selected for to run from Charla was a pro Chung Chung-rae person. I think that really ticked off a lot of people in the North Cholla province. And then going forward, I believe the next one will be parliamentary. DP has to keep a very close eye on this region if they don't want to lose it. It was a tight race. Week ahead. This is actually not week ahead, but since we did not really discuss much outside election, there was a major U.S. delegation visit this week to talk about the nuclear sub and other issues. We have written about that and we will discuss further next week after hearing more on what the actual follow-up measures do look like. And the other political agenda, I believe there usually after local elections, there is a cabinet reshuffle and the headliner that we are looking at right now is potentially Prime Minister. Gina, can you walk us through it?
Yeah, so there are reports that are citing very prominent DP officials close familiar with the matter that Prime Minister Kim Min-seok will be resigning within the next few weeks or the next few days to run for DP leader. It has been expected that the Prime Minister is looking very much and is very fond of trying to get that DP leadership. So it does look like a two-way contest between Chung Chung-le, who is slated to rerun for the seat, and the outgoing or reported outgoing Prime Minister Kim Min-seok in the August National Convention.
Which I'm sure will make Chung Chung-le really happy with the president.
And lastly, this is not week ahead, but it's tomorrow when you guys will be listening to this. Jensen Huang is visiting the CEO of Nvidia. He is visiting today, Thursday. He will be meeting leaders of Naver, Hyundai, and SK for a somak and samgyeopsal. Sounds nice. It will be in Seongsu district, which is like a hip area sort of with a lot of startups. And something to keep an eye on is after this, what kind of deal do they come up with when it comes to the corporate alliance on the robotics and the physical AI sort of issues.
And all of this information will be sent to your email inboxes by Monday, 2 p.m. via the Weekend newsletter. So if you'd like to know more, please subscribe. Bye-bye.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in.
If you want to know more, sign up for our daily executive briefings. We'll brief you on all you need to know from the past 24 hours and why it matters, delivered to your inbox every morning.
If you want to stay ahead of the curve, sign up for Korea Pro to get a full package of insights, from daily expert analysis to profiles, month in review, week ahead, and more.
And until next time, I'm Jungmin Kim.
I'm Junho Park.
And I'm John Lee, and we'll see you next time on the Korea Pro Podcast.